Hi everyone, in this video of Accelerated Chess Dragon, we're going to be looking at another chess tactic, and this is the skewer. Now, what exactly is a skewer? Unlike a pin, which has the stronger piece behind the weaker piece, a skewer has a weaker piece behind the stronger piece. And basically what happens is you are going to win that weaker piece because of a certain problem that the stronger piece is facing, whether it be a check or attack, something like that. So, here, let's look at this example. Both sides have equal material, but it's white to move, and white can immediately change that by playing one of four moves. So what are the four moves that white can play that skewer the king on d5 to the rook on d8? Well, one option is king c3 check, and it doesn't matter where the black king goes to. Let's say it moves to e5, rook takes d8, and you just lost your rook. Now, it doesn't just have to be king c3 check that wins the material. It could also be king c2 check, and same idea, you cannot protect the rook on d8. It could also be king to e3 check, which has the same idea, and also king e2 check. So it doesn't matter where you go to, as long as you don't cover up the d-file, you are going to get a skewer towards the black king, and black cannot defend his rook. So that would just be it. Let's look at a couple more examples. In this first example of a skewer, we see that black is actually up 2 pawns. Now, how does white win back the material? Well, white actually has 2 moves to choose from. One move being better than the other. Here, whites can actually play the move queen takes d4 check. And there's another move which I will get to in a while. But first, queen takes d4 check. White willingly sacrifices his queen, and this may seem like it's a complete mistake, but in fact, it isn't. Because after c takes d4 is played, white takes the pawn on d4 with the bishop. And after bishop d4 check is played, black cannot defend the queen on h8, so you must play something like king e6, and you simply lose the queen on h8. Now, black is just down an entire rook, and there's nothing you can do now. The other option to play is actually, instead of going queen takes d4, rook takes d4. And it has a similar idea, because if you play c takes d4, there's queen takes d4 check. You don't worry about the knight, you play queen takes d4 check, king moves, and you take the queen on h8. And that's simply it for black. Let's look at another example. In this position, white is actually lost. He has 4 pawns and a bishop and a queen, whereas black has 3 pawns and a rook and a queen. So white technically just has a bishop and a pawn for a rook, which doesn't exactly add up to equal material. But equal material is the least of white's concerns, because white is most likely going to get checkmated if they do not find a way to win quickly. And you might be asking, how does white win quickly? Well, white can actually play this move, bishop to e4 check. Queen a8 check is effectless. If you play this move as white, there's absolutely nothing you've achieved, because the king will go to c7, the queen is defended. So you can't exactly win material and save the position. The best move is to actually go bishop e4 check. Now, it seems like a completely terrible move, because you just give up your bishop, and there's no purpose in it. Well, after queen takes e4, now you go queen a8 check. And it's a skewer. The king has no way to defend the queen on e4. And after something like king d6, you lose the queen. And that's it for black. Black just went from being up in exchange to down material. Just like that. So, let's look at one last example, and then we'll try some puzzles ourselves. In this final example we look at, we see that both sides have 3 pawns, but black has a queen against a rook and a knight, meaning that black is up material. So, white must do something quick if he doesn't want to lose. So, what does white do here? Well, white plays knight a4 check, and if the pawn does not take the knight on a4, then you're simply going to lose the queen with knight takes b2. And it may seem like a weird move. Why did you just sacrifice the knight after b takes a4? Well, because now it just completely opened up the b file to allow the move rook b8 check. And after this move is played, the king is skewered to the queen on b2. You have no other choice but to give up the queen after something like king c5, rook takes b2, and white is completely winning here. So, now that we've seen some examples, let's try some puzzles ourselves. In this position, it is black to move, and black is actually down a pawn. But somehow, black is actually able to win the game here. So how can black use a skewer to easily beat white? Okay, so black will actually play the move queen takes a7 check. And it's important why it's queen takes a7 check and not the move rook a1 check. They seem the same, but the order really does matter here. If you go queen takes a7 check, then you guess the correct move. Because now, white is forced to take the queen. Otherwise, he loses his queen himself. So queen takes a7, and now this is where the rook on h1 comes into play. It goes rook a1 check. The king goes to b2 or b4, it doesn't matter. Rook takes a7. Now, black just went from being down a pawn to up a rook. So this is an easy win, and black can easily mate white. But I wanted to point out one more thing. It's important that it's queen takes a7 check, and not rook a1 check. Although it seems the same, it does work if the king moves. Let's say to b4 or b2, because then you can just capture the rook on a7. However, white can just capture the rook on a1. And when you capture the rook on a7, white can defend with king b2. And after this, it only will lead to a draw after, say, queen d4 check, king goes to b1, and now you just get a perpetual as black. So, on to the next puzzle. In the second position, we see that white is actually down a piece. But white has a way of actually winning the position. So in this next puzzle, I want you to find out how white can win using a skewer. Okay, so white can play the move queen to a3 check. And after this, king c4 must be played. It's the only move. Queen a2 check. And after this, black is lost. The king can go anywhere, whether it be c5, d3, or b4, but regardless of where it goes, queen takes f7. After this, black is completely lost, and that's an easy victory for white. On to the last position. In this very position, it seems quite equal. Both sides have the same number of pawns, bishops, and rooks. But looks can be very deceiving, and white actually has a way of winning in this position thanks to a skewer. So what can white do here? Okay, so the correct move is rook to b3, and it simply just traps the bishop on a3. Now, the bishop cannot go to b2 or c1 because the rook and bishop are guarding it. So b4 seems like at least black might have to give up a pawn, but he can still stay in the game. But black actually is going to be down a piece. After bishop b4 is played, white is not going to take with the bishop. Taking with the bishop will only give white an extra pawn, and that is not enough to win, especially in rook endgames. So what is white going to do? Well, white is going to capture with the rook. And it's very convenient that black's rook on f8 is also lined up there. So now after c takes b4, you capture on b4 with the bishop. And now there's an attack towards the king. However, if the king moves, let's say to d5, you can now capture the rook on f8. And this is it for black. Just down a piece and also down a pawn. So black has nothing and white is going to win here. So that is basically the tactic of a skewer. And I hope you understood it a lot more now. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and if you have any suggestions or feedback for me, please let me know in the comments section, and stay tuned for more chess.